Hello everyone. I'm your host, Presenter Chishimba. Welcome to our episode of the Discovery Podcast. Allow me to introduce our honorable guest today, Mr. Patrick Nsama Mpundu.
Well, it's a great pleasure to be speaking to the two of you today. It's a great pleasure to be on the Discovery Podcast. I'm very glad that your team is doing a fantastic job. And I'm excited to speak to you people about the things that matter, not only in our community, but also in our personal lives, and to see what the future holds as well.
We are actually very humbled to have you on our show, sir. And we would just like you to tell us a bit more about your background or your childhood life.
Okay, so that's a very interesting question. I was born on the 21st of April in the year 2000, much younger than most people think.
Yeah.
So I did get into leadership when I was quite young, born and raised right here in Lusaka, Zambia. But I've also lived on the Copper Belt. I lived in Northwestern Province at some time. But majority of my childhood, I grew up right here in Lusaka, not too far away from where we're shooting this particular episode at the moment. I lived for a very long time in Ibex Hill. I still live there now. And really for me, I think leadership had always been something that I had desired, even before I fully got to understand the way in which God wanted me to lead, or rather the way in which God wanted me to serve. And so when I was in high school, I got into different leadership roles, but really the critical moment happened when I was in university, because at that particular point in time, I realized that each and every one of us have an obligation and a responsibility to make a difference in whichever sphere of influence we find ourselves in, and whichever communities we find ourselves in. And when I got into university, I had made a promise to God that I would aspire to be student union president. When I got to the University of Lusaka, I joined the debate society. And by the grace of God, in my second year, I decided to stand as student union president. The interesting story there is that we had a legal requirement of being 21 years and above to be student union president.
Right.
But then I was 19 at the time.
Oh, nice.
And so we did a few naughty things, like I like to say, we did a few naughty things. And I managed to stand as president. No one knew me in the school at the time. But then God really had a big play in everything, and got to win that election. And then after that election, eventually got to introduce myself to Chainda Community.
Wow, so that's when your campaign began.
Well, my campaign as student president was 2019. My campaign as ward councillor for Chainda was around May 2020.
Oh, that's really nice. Growing up, I believe the community and the family shapes who we are. So I believe you had a role models, or some values were installed probably from the community or from the home you were coming from. So like, who was your role model?
I think my role model really still is Jesus Christ. From a young age, I was privileged to get to know him. I was privileged to attend, prayers, go to church, but then of course a meaningful encounter with him only happened in my late teens, when I was about 19 or 20. That's when I decided to take a step closer to being with God, because I was always in between. A lot of people don't know that many years before the wider community got to know me, I wasn't always a preacher. I wasn't always preaching the gospel. I wasn't always a minister of the gospel. There were earlier points in my discovery where I indulged in things that, many of the young people today have unfortunately found themselves in. And I think mine is a testimony of the grace and mercy of God. Because I remember when I was a university student, I knew about Jesus, I knew about the gospel, but, I said, you can always do this later. But then I didn't realize that the whole purpose and reason why we're here on earth is to make a significant purpose in alignment with his will. And so I think he was always a strong role model. And even when I look back at many other things that he has achieved in my life, they're all miracles, because I was never qualified for any of those things that he got to do in my life. It was just standing on faith, standing on his promise, and he made a way. Of course, there were also other role models who came up in terms of physical people. My parents are great role models. they're not necessarily in the field of work that I'm in, but they've always been very, very supportive. And then I also look up to people like, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. He's a great role model of mine. I also look up to my pastor, Apostle Fred. He's been pastoring me since I was 12 years old. I wasn't always the easiest person to pastor because I was very rebellious and naughty. But then God is merciful. I think that's what we can say, yeah.
I believe in 2018 you were the debate union president. And so how was it like? Did you face any challenges because you're a president and there are many times when you feel intimidated by how people talk about you and say, no, he's young or maybe he's not that brilliant enough. So how did you take those challenges and intimidations?
Well, I think for me, when I was in my first year of university, the age prejudice was not really a thing because I never really knew, or I never really did tell anyone my age. It was a big secret. So I always lied about my age because at the time, God had blessed me to have a little beard. So people thought I was a little bit older than I was. So that really wasn't an issue. But I think, of course, being debate society president in 2018 at the University of Lusaka, there was always the fact that universities like UNZA always thought that they were better. And so a defining moment for me during that particular time was when we had the task of beating UNZA at a debate, and I think that came in early 2019, and it just happened at the same time when I was aspiring to be student union president. And so no one really knew me at the time. We had taken over the debate society, but majority of the school didn't know me. And so when that particular debate happened, it was a very defining moment because UNZA were coming home, and by the grace and mercy of God, we won that debate and I was best speaker. And so that sort of allowed a few people to know who this guy was. And yeah, it was a very interesting moment. Things happened very quickly after that. We began campaigning, and I think student politics is very interesting because I think the individual that I was when I was student union president and the individual that I am today as area councillor is very different. And I think a lot of people who know me from my past get a little bit shocked sometimes because they say, is this the same guy? What happened? And for me, my answer is always the same. It was an encounter with Jesus that changed my life forever.
Okay, so there are these challenges we face as students in university. For example, I'll give an example of relationships because that's the main problem that university students are facing. So did you have any challenge, or rather I would put it, did you have any relationship that you feel contributed to the challenges, or rather you felt as though it was pulling you down? Because those are the excuses people give, like, no, I'm studying, so this relationship can't work out for me and stuff like that. Did you have such an encounter?
Oh, not specifically that, but I think when we look at relationships as a whole in university is sort of like a world of its own, and life changes very quickly after university, and people don't really realize that. And so people tend to get into commitments that they don't really realize. Others become married when they're not supposed to be at university level. And I saw a lot of friends unfortunately fall into very destructive paths because some relationships were very transactional, because maybe someone is a blesser or someone is a sponsor and all of those things, and I think that affects someone's livelihood in a sense. But for me, I was privileged, I would say fortunately, not really engaged in any serious relationship at the time. I think I was still very much on a path of self-discovery, and then by the time I got into my third year of university, I had made a covenant with God that I was not going to get into any relationship because he had to do a lot of work on me. He had to train and teach me in a lot of things. And so, yeah, I think that was my brief experience with relationships in university.
Okay. That's really nice. I believe that you are not only the Chainda Ward Councillor, but also an economist. So apart from being Chainda Councillor, what else do you do, like a side hustle, should I call it? Yeah.
Well,
what else do you do?
It's very interesting. I think even from the first day I began to study economics at the university, I knew I wouldn't really practice it in the formal sector because I'd always had the desire, number one, to do business, and then also to get into leadership and ministry. But of course, life did not necessarily turn out the way I expected it. And me being councillor, of course, is a part-time job. But it has full-time implications because people want you all the time. People need your attention. There's always problems. No matter how much you can do, there'll always be new issues that will come about. And I guess that's the basis of leadership. But what I've learned to do is appropriate time for my work as a councillor and also time for business, because you can't make money through politics. You only make money through politics if you're a crook. And I think our generation is very cognizant of the fact that we are not serving for ourselves, we're serving for others, and we want to make a genuine difference in whatever way we can. And so I do business on the side. I'm not very public about it because someone once told me that you never want to put your private business in public, but I can share with you. I've previously run a company which was into supplying corporate gifts. Nice. But then also at the moment, I'm also trying to establish a company which is into the retail of solar products.
That's really nice.
Yeah. With the problem that we have for this.
Yes.
Exactly. What would you say, like, for us youths, like the youths out there in universities who don't want to really engage into like let me say debate or school associations due to they'll disturb my studies? Do you encourage them to join, because by the end of the day you don't know, you have to discover yourself? Or
well, I think one of the things people must realize a whole lot is it would be a waste to only go to university and acquire a degree or a diploma. University is a world which can train and equip you for so many things. Some of the best entrepreneurs did not even study business management. They studied other courses, but throughout their university tenure, they were given an opportunity to practice that. Some of the leaders that we see today, for example, President Mwanawasa, and many other leaders across the world began their leadership careers in university. So many people began perfecting certain skills, whether it's baking, whether it's a different form of networking. All of that begins in university. So I believe that university offers us a very rich platform to perfect a lot of the skills that God has placed in us. And so I think it's very, very important that even as we pay attention and focus on our academics, my recommendation is also explore other areas where you can be relevant to society. Because even if you're someone who's interested in the job market, you realize that your employability will not be based off the fact that you have a degree. Because when you have a degree, there's maybe 5 or 10,000 others who graduated with a degree also that year. So what differentiates you? There are certain soft skills, your ability to speak to people, your ability to be kind, your ability to have emotional intelligence, your ability to be friendly, your ability to motivate and inspire others. Those will not necessarily come from reading books. They come from other social experiences that we get to develop. So I think it's very important that for young university students, we go for a blend. Focus on your books. Of course, that's the primary function while you're there. But also, it's also an opportunity to develop your spiritual life. There are certain people who got born again at a campus fellowship, and that's how their lives changed forever. So I think it's important to have a mixed approach.
Very interesting. Thank you very much for those beautiful words of encouragement. I believe our youths out there are listening, and we can work on it. I personally am doing public relations first year, so I'm also motivated by what you have taught me. I work on it. And what keeps you motivated to continue like serving your community, or for you to continue as Chainda Ward Councillor? What keeps you motivated?
Prayer, number one, and the fact that I did not send myself here. I didn't choose to come to Chainda. The Lord sent me here. It's a very interesting story of how I decided to run for councillor. I was at the University of Lusaka, and then I was always, I just began to know the Lord Jesus a little bit more. And I was having a debate within my heart saying, Lord, what am I going to do next? Like, I've done the union presidency at school, but what next? Because there's so many people who've done student leadership. What next for me? And so I was in the parking lot with my best friend, and I heard the voice of God very clearly. And he said, go to Chainda and stand as councillor. And at the time, I was a 20-year-old in my third year of university. I'd never been to Chainda. Or I had been to Chainda maybe just from afar, but not really mingled inside. No one in Chainda knew me. And of course, I didn't have the money most people are afraid of joining politics because they feel that they need a whole lot of money. But I began my campaign in Chainda with, I'll tell you the truth, not more than 3,000 kwacha from my savings, yeah.
How did you cope up with that? Like, with you having a little tight budget, but yet there's a big project ahead.
Oh, a big project, and of course, I was going up against very tough competition, as some of you may remember. And, you know, for me, I understood that if God is with you, no one can stand against. And I knew that I was not pursuing this endeavor because of fame, glory, or power, but I was doing it because I wanted to make a genuine difference, as the Lord had placed it on my heart. And so I realized that there's some things that are more important than money. Yes, money excites people in campaigns, but also developing meaningful relationships and just being myself. When I first came to Chainda, my nyanja was very broken. I remember once I was at a funeral and they had asked me to give a speech because I was the aspiring candidate on a political party ticket. So it says, and I said, okay, ziko mokwambili, pano pamene tafika, tifuna tioneko change muchainda. So tentifake mitu pamozi. So that instead of saying kuchinja chainda, I said kuchinda chainda. And oh my God.
I can only imagine the funeral.
Everyone laughed, and it was a very big, very big funeral in the community. And so everyone laughed. Like, where is this boy from? You know what I mean? But then God worked it out for the good and for His glory, because a lot of people got to know me then. So what went on? There's this kulikamfana kama eskazi ukamba chinyaka kama nikafuno imepa ukansela. And you know, it was very interesting. I remember during the campaigns, we didn't have t-shirts to give people. We didn't have hats to give people. So we'd just go with a megaphone, and I'd be walking with 3 old men going around, passing out throughout the compound. And, you know, for me, the motivation was that God is with us. I remember we'd be moving around with a Bible, and at that time, I had a lot of interactions with people. And sometimes you'd find, you go to a certain house, and the lady says, Daddy nesini mvera buno, nigule nkoni mankwala. I said, ndrama mankwala nilibe, but with a Bible and we can pray. And we'd pray on many occasions. We saw many great miracles, people being healed. And it was at that moment that I realized that God had also called me for ministry. And so when I look back, it's something very emotional, because I knew that the people who I went up against were probably more qualified, but God had put me here for a purpose, and there's no way I can ever take the glory away from Him. I'm always just like, Lord, no matter what challenge comes, I know that You've never sent me to fail. Victory belongs to You, and everything will work out for Your good. And so I think that's what keeps me motivated, because sometimes being a leader is not, if you try and do it on your own effort, it's not easy. But when you do it with the Lord, whatever challenge will come, you know that victory is certain.
Okay, so there is a question that was popping through my mind, where, for example, I want to run as the Chainda Ward Councillor, and you're there, and it seems you love your job. So then, the emphasis on that one. So then I come there, and I'm like, okay, he also did it in his 20s. I can also do it in my 20s. And what advice would you give me, especially for the fact that I want to challenge you? So what advice would you give me as a youth who wants to run as a ward councillor for Chainda?
Well, I think as leaders, the greatest call of God for us is to come from a place of love. Whatever we do, we must come from a place of love. And for me, it's always a great thing to see young people wanting to rise. I'll share with you that I don't know if I'm still going to stand as councillor in the next election. It's still something that I'm praying about. But also, I'm very aware of the fact that I did not come up on my own. There's certain people who believed in me, certain people who motivated me. There's so many factors that may demotivate you. You look at the economy, you look at money, you look at, do I have enough experience, how people look at me, how people respect me. But look, if God has given you that conviction, that's your greatest ticket. That's your adoption, that's your victory sign. If God has given you the conviction, then do it. And then also one thing I've realized about leadership is that just because someone did it when they were 25 or 21 or 30 doesn't mean that you have to do it the same way. Each and every one of us is wired differently. Each and every one of us has a different destiny. There are certain people who, you know, maybe become councillor at 21 or 22, but then maybe that's where they end and that's where their journey ends. And then there's people who never became councillors and they became MPs and presidents and leaders. But also one of the things that you need to know is the reason why you are doing that thing is the most important. Why are you doing it? Is it for your own self-ambition or is it because of your love for God and His people? If your answer is the latter, then you're doing it for the right reasons and God will definitely make a way. One thing I always say about Zambian people, specifically the people in Chainda and Munali, is they're very hospitable people, they're very friendly. And so if you've come with the right intentions and the right heart, God sees that and He'll make a way. And so I would encourage you to go for it, yeah.
Okay. And what of someone who's having, since you said family also matters, there's some people who are supposed to inspire you and stuff like that, right? So what advice would you give somebody who doesn't have anybody who can support them, who's there cheering out for them in the background? What advice would you give them? But they want to run as a councillor or any other position, yes. So what advice would you give them? Because they're like, I don't have anybody to back me up. So what advice would you give such people?
Well, in the beginning, I didn't really have anyone to back me up as well. Because imagine I was 20, still in school, and I tell my parents that I want to stand as councillor. Of course, they were very skeptical about it because, you know, politics is a bit dangerous sometimes and people, you know, they were not very sure about that choice. But I assured them that I knew that what I was doing was not for my own purpose or self-ambition, but I was doing it because of a greater purpose. And so because of that, eventually they came on board. But another thing that you need to consider is sometimes being a visionary is a bit lonely. Not everyone is supposed to understand your vision. Only you and God understand that vision. And if it's a real vision from God, the moment you begin to pursue, people will come on board. It's like, for example, if you want to do a business, if I come out here and say, in front of Gulisa tomato, everyone will say, no, tomato, silibuino, chanchani, there's all these problems, you know what I mean? But then only you know how you want to do it. And one person's experience will not be yours. So you really have to be resilient, because I won't lie and say it will always be a smooth road, but you're guaranteed that it will not be an effort in vain.
Okay, thank you for that answer.
Right. Sorry to take you a little bit back, but I would also want you to encourage the youths in schools, like in secondary. I believe you did your secondary school in by the prestigious Island Cultural Education, if I got it right.
Islamic Culture Education. Yes, I was at a Muslim school.
Yeah, okay.
It's called Lesa in Kamala.
Okay, right. What were your favorite subjects there, and did maybe some of your subjects in school also inspire you to reach the goals you are at right now, or what?
Well, it definitely played a role. I really loved history.
Okay.
I think for me, one of my pastimes, one of my hobbies is I'll go on Wikipedia and just read history about different people who've gone ahead of us. So I really, really loved that. For me, I've never been to grade 12.
Okay.
I finished school in grade 11. Yeah, so I did Cambridge, and so I finished school in grade 11. And so when I completed my school, the year I was supposed to be in grade 12, I was in first year of university, because I was privileged to have someone to sponsor me. So I took up that opportunity. So I believe high school is something very, very important. And I think my motivation to some of our friends in high school is begin to know God now. Because as soon as you know Him, there's nothing that will shake you, there's nothing that will break you, and you surely pursue and overcome. And so I think one prayer that I always have is that young people may begin to know God earlier, because the sooner you know God, the greater your path will be.
True. Thank you very much for that wonderful motivation and the wonderful speech. I believe our youths out there are inspired. I am personally inspired.
Very inspired.
Yes.
So, because, I wanted to run as president in my 3rd year at university, right?
Yeah.
And I was there. I was like, no one knows me yet, and we're there. They don't even know my name. Like,
Exactly,
my name is
and the
Lumba.
people who are known.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, I'm like, what motivation do I have? But after hearing his story, because he started out without no one knowing him also,
Yeah,
so I
exactly.
felt motivated. I'm like, okay, cool. I'm going to try this out. Yeah. So that's how it is.
Yeah.
So Mr. Nsama, so how do you deal with the critics?
I think being a leader, being a public figure, one of the things that you always be open to is you'll be open to, number one, a lot of love, and also a lot of hate. There are people who will love you just maybe how you look or how you sound.
Yeah.
Others who not like you for the same reasons. But I think the motivation is not to prove a point to the critics, but to do the job that you're elected to do, to do the job that God called you to do. I believe the greatest form of leadership is servant leadership. We're not doing anything so that anyone can praise us or sing songs about us, but we do what we do because it's a call from God to serve His people.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's a very great privilege. Even when the critics, as some may call themselves, speak, I know it's a signal and a sign that there's more work to be done. I always believe that there's no one individual who can transform an entire community on their own.
Yeah.
It takes a concerted effort from everyone being involved, and also it takes time. I've learned that leadership is like a relay race. You run and cover the ground that you've been asked to cover, and then you pass on the baton to the next generation or to the next individual who come after that. And so I'm also cognizant of the fact that I can't address all the challenges at one time, but what's within my scope of control and what God allows me to do, I do.
Okay. Over to you, Patanshi.
So would you say that some of the challenges also prepared you or shaped you for your role as councillor? They helped you?
Oh, the challenges is like it's being panel beaten, because sometimes you have phone calls of people who, just say, oh, we've called to say hello and thank you for doing this and that.
Yeah.
And then there are others who would just, call and blast out their anger on you. I think as a leader, that trains you because you can't respond to everyone. Because you have to sometimes be the bigger person, be mature, and understand that you're not a boss, you're a servant. And so as a servant, you're there to listen and apply where you can. And so it's allowed me to deal with leadership matters when you're under pressure. I've learned not to respond when under pressure, but also do the right thing no matter what. Sometimes the right thing is unpopular. But you don't do things to be popular, you do them because they're right. And certain things may only be appreciated in years to come. And ultimately, God is the final judge of our race.
All right, that's very nice. I would like to ask, how has CDF affected, not really affected, but impacted your role as councillor in the community?
Oh, it's made a lot of resources available. Of course, there's more we'd wanted to do, but I'm very proud of a lot of our young people who've utilized CDF through the skills training bursaries. Chainda alone has a very great record. From 2022 till date, we've managed to secure sponsorship for over 600 students within Chainda at different colleges and training institutes. And so people are not only getting skills in carpentry and welding, but they're getting diploma programs which are fully sponsored under CDF. Depending on your talent, depending on your desire, there's help that's coming through. We've also seen some infrastructure development. We've seen the 1x3 classroom block being constructed at Chelston Secondary School. The school initially had about 1,500 students, but now it has over 3,300 students. Because of course more people are going back to school because of free education.
Yeah.
But something that I'm really, really looking forward to in the next few months, which is almost being concluded, is the construction of Chainda Police Post. For a long, long time, our community has not been as secure as it used to be in the years past because of, the challenge of junkies.
Oh, yeah.
And so for us, that was one of the first priorities, to build a police post. But it came with challenges because we didn't really have any land in Chainda. And we didn't want to build a police post in Mpundu or in Avondo. We wanted it to be right here in the heart of the community. And so we managed to purchase a piece of land, which is just about done. And so construction will begin very, very soon for that police post. We want to have the situation where people can walk freely in the community, no matter the time. And I think there's been some substantial progress made there. And I think we'll make some good announcements very soon.
Okay, so Mr. Nsama, we don't know your marital status. For some of us who are single, searching for a godly soul. Yeah. So can you tell us about your marital status?
It's always been something that I've always dodged when asked. But I think it's always been a bone of contention. I remember there are certain people who told me that they couldn't vote for me as councillor because I wasn't married. I don't know how they expected me to be married at 21, but it's definitely something that I'm praying about and considering. I'm not yet married, but I do want to settle down in the near future. It's something that I'm praying about, waiting on God for. I don't want to rush because I don't want someone who will misrepresent what leadership is about to the community. Because for me, when I look at marriage, I look at someone who can also be a mother to my community, someone who can also support the vision that God has given me, both in terms of leadership and ministry. So it's something that I'm very, very careful about. And I'm a believer who stands on the word of God in Isaiah 60 verse 22. When the time is right, the Lord will make it happen. So I'm not rushing it. I'm waiting on the Lord, and in due season, maybe there'll be a ring on my finger.
Very well answered. So youths out there who've been asking this question, he's not married.
And there's this question that I also wanted to ask. Is there any time in your life, let me put it in specific, in your university life, where you, let's say, because most of the people in our time now, people are committing suicide, and its majority is in university. Is there any time in your university life that you felt, okay, I think I'm done, I think I just want to kill myself, I'm done? Because there are times when, yes, you're a Christian, but you feel like God isn't answering you, you know, because sometimes we can be impatient to wait on the Lord, and you go like, okay, so I'm done. God is not answering, and there's doom next to you, and there's a rope next to you. So have you ever had such an encounter?
Well, I think for me, one of the things I realize is that suicide is a permanent solution to a temporal problem, because whatever challenges or problems we face, they're always temporal. As a university student, yes, I did come across challenges, and I think for me that was a motivation to get closer to God, because I think whenever you're not in the right place with God, you're not at your maximum potential, no matter how well you think you're doing. And so for me, I realized that there's been a lot of talk today about mental health, but people don't realize that you are a spirit being before you're a physical being, before you're a mental being. And so your spiritual health really matters. Of course, counseling and speaking to someone does help, but really there are certain matters which are spiritual. And there's a certain confidence, a certain realization, a certain motivation that you get by just being in the presence of God. Before we began the podcast, we prayed, and we've seen God's presence here. And for me, I think let's never be afraid to go to God no matter what. He's not looking for us to be perfect, but there's an assurance that even when we come to Him as imperfect beings, we'll not live the way we came. There's a transformation, there's a healing, there's a deliverance which comes. And so I think my message to any university students or young people out there who have had a challenge with their mental health, don't be afraid to seek the call of God. There are times in which you feel like, oh, God is not answering. But then I was telling someone just the other day, look at a fish in the sea, right? It's in the sea for hours on end, it lives there, but it doesn't drown, right? Look at the fact that it doesn't wait for fertilizer to be given and a seed to be sown for it to have maize and eat something, right? But then it's always provided for. That's an assurance that God is indeed there. And then look at you and me, right? God, in His infinite wisdom, has always made a way for us to be provided for the things that matter. And so the greatest challenge we have is to remember and stand on the promises of God. Because there are times in which the enemy will make you want to swear away. And you realize that when you're having a mental issue, what normally happens is that the devil will exaggerate one big problem and then will minimize all the progress that you made. So all of a sudden, maybe let's say there's a challenge with school fees.
Yeah.
And maybe that may really worry you, right? And it's a problem. But then with the lack of right guidance, you find that you dwell on that so much that you forget that you've got somewhere where you can sleep. You've got hands where God can use you to do business. You've got an opportunity of having any random person come through to your aid by the blessing and messaging of God. And so I realized that one of the things that's very, very important is seeking the counsel of spiritual people. It's not always wise to seek counsel just from anyone. I think a lot of people have made bad decisions because they got advice from the wrong people. Maybe having a heartbreak and someone tells you, no, just go and sleep with another person.
Yes.
Or maybe having a lack and or just get a sugar daddy. But then there's always a way out with God, and there's always a way that's victorious with God. Someone told me something very interesting the other day. They said, there's nothing that catches God by surprise. There's absolutely nothing. And so a lot of us, we tend to panic because there's a matter that has caught us by surprise, something that came unexpectedly. Whether it could be a loss, a disappointment, it came unexpectedly. But that never surprises God because He looks at your life from the end to the beginning. And so that signifies that there's always grace for us to overcome, for us to be victorious. And all we have to do is ask Him. One of the things that I always say to people is, there's no one who's ever asked God for help who He doesn't help. The only challenge that's there is we lack patience sometimes because we want to knock today and get the answer tomorrow. But then there's a requirement of patience. In due season, He makes it happen.
Okay.
I've seen and testified of it.
Yeah. That's very amazing. I would like to ask, have you ever faced a challenge of maybe in university having missing results or a career course? And what would you encourage youths out there that have career courses and they feel like they can't do better, or because their friends are doing better than them, they feel intimidated, or I cannot associate with these guys anymore because they are better than me? What advice would you give to such students?
So I was still a university student when I became councillor.
Yeah.
I remember I missed certain meetings in the council chamber because I was writing exams. I think maybe failing a course has happened to many people.
Yeah.
But then failing a course is similar to having different challenges. It could be maybe certain issues at home. It could be maybe certain areas where you're lacking. But the idea is to always keep your focus. It may not always be easy, but then you have to also understand that there's a God factor which we can't rule out.
Yeah.
When people call on His name, He really, really assists. And so you have to be reliant on Him, but also you have to be able to focus and plan very well. Challenges happen. Someone said to me, any man can take victory gloriously, but very few can bounce back from defeat. And so you have to find the deep, meaningful relationship with God in order for you to bounce back from that. Many people can and many people will, but then the challenge is when we go to God, we normally like to go to Him with the big words, the praise and the worship. But sometimes you can go and cry to God. You don't have to do it in front of everyone, but it can be in your room. You go down on your knees and say, look, Lord, if you don't help me, no one will help me. If I keep failing, I can't help myself. And so you also need to realize that you can't help yourself on your own. You can't deliver yourself. Only God can. And so you have to really combine deep acknowledgement of who God is and ask Him for help with also applying yourself, picking yourself up, and really just surrounding yourself with people who believe in you. It's very, very important. It's hard to come by, but for me, I'll tell you that I even relate this to politics.
Yeah.
A lot of people ask me why I don't have a very big team around me. Why? It's simply because you'd rather have 5 people who are genuinely with you and for you, rather than 50 people who maybe 99% of them are snakes and they don't really support your vision. You know what I mean? So if it means you cutting down on the crowd to be surrounded with 1 or 2 people who may be considered boring or old, that's absolutely fine, but you know what you're trying to get, because you're trying to build a certain environment that will motivate you. And I think this is something my pastor told me a few years ago. He said, if you're going to do anything great, prepare to move on a bit of a lonely road. If you're always going to move with the group, you won't manage. And I think a lot of people in university tend to fail and struggle because of the group mentality.
Yeah.
You have to find yourself. You have to find yourself as an individual, because no two people have the same purpose.
Yes.
I remember when I was in first year of university, I had so many friends who I'd be moving with all the time. But then I got born again, and then my friends reduced. And then I became a politician. My friends also reduced. You know, people would go and hang out in their rooms after class. After class, I would be in Chainda at the market. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's about finding yourself as an individual. What has God called me to do? And if it means that you take it alone, you're not walking that path alone. You're walking with God, and you'll be successful.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that word of encouragement. If I got it right, you said that failing it's not bad, but like there's something wrong you're doing, and you need to focus on your goal and change certain things for you to succeed, and always put God first in prayer, right?
Yeah. And putting God first is not just an issue of prayer, but it's something that also needs to be put in place in practice.
Okay.
God is not someone who you can lie to or cheat. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can't, I'm praying today, and then for the next week or days, you're doing other things. And so you have to be able to practice the word of God, put it into practice. The Bible tells us that the blessing is in doing. So you have to be a doer of the word. And so for me, I remember when I got born again, remember your spirit is the one that gets born again, but your soul and your body will still like the things of the past. So I had to lose touch with a lot of my buddies, a lot of my friends, because I didn't want to compromise on how far God had brought me. You see, when you're in a place where you're in the world, you succumb to depression, you succumb to anxiety, you succumb to all these things. And so for me, I look at that and I realize that that's a very dark place. And a lot of the people who you see who are on drugs, who are in all sorts of illicit activities, they're just trying to escape. They're just trying to voice out that there's something that's lacking, right?
Yeah.
And so the truth of the matter is, if you've been in that dark place and you see the light, you don't want to go back to the darkness, do you?
No.
Right? And so sometimes the darkness looks a bit attractive.
Yeah.
And so it may tempt you to go back. But then you have to be cognizant and remember the fact that, look, you don't want to go back to that dark place. Because it may look entertaining on the surface, but behind that entertainment there's suicidal thoughts, there's depression, there's anxiety, there's people doing things that they're not proud of, things that can get them killed, things that can get them jailed. It's not worth it. And so you really need to have the mindset to understand that where you are in a place of peace, peace is priceless. Money can't buy that. We've seen millionaires, celebrities who've killed themselves. Why? Because they had all the money in the world, but they didn't have peace. And peace only comes from God. So once you realize that what God has given you is the greatest treasure of all, you don't want to trade it for anything else. You know? You don't want to trade it for anything else. And so you hold on to it with everything that you have. Even when some days are harder than others, you still want to hold on to it. But then also, I always tell people that you cannot pursue Christ by your own will. Every time you try and do it on your own, or you feel like you're forcing things, you feel like it's so hard, you feel like you're punishing yourself.
Yeah.
But when you submit to Him and allow His grace to lift you, you never feel like it's hard. I actually tell people that being a believer is actually hard than being it's actually easier than being in the world. Because when you're a believer, there's a grace of God that lifts you. You will not feel like you're losing out when you're doing the right thing. You'll not feel like there's anything that you'd rather be doing when you're in His presence. And so the key is humility. The key is always asking for help, and He'll lift you and He'll make it easy.
Okay. So back to relationships. So there's a time I remember, because I also go to your church. So there's a time I remember Apostle Frederick was talking about if you're dating, there's no planning, the things that us young people are doing. So now I go to university and there's this guy who's, let's say, as we would put it, prayerful. And he comes to me and says, no, I love you, and shani. We start dating, and then he asks for sex. And then you refuse as you go back to your Christianhood and say, no, we're not supposed to have sex before marriage. And then he brings up the topic of, if you love me, you're going to have sex with me. So what advice would you give a person who's in that situation? Do they have to still go ahead with it? If you love me, you give me sex and stuff like that? Because as Christians can be like, okay, God, this guy is perfect. I've never met anybody like him, and this is the only guy that has shown me shiny. And we cry to God like that in such terms. Okay. So we would want to compromise, or let me just say, we would want to negotiate with God and say, okay, this is going to be good because he's done this for me. So what advice would you give out to the youths that are
so if there's someone in that situation, then he's not the one, because God cannot allow you to work with certain values and not have another partner who is specifically also walking in those values. And so the word of God is clear that none of you shall lack a mate. There's someone that God has separated and prepared for you. And normally, just before you meet the one, you meet a lot of counterfeits. You meet a lot of counterfeits. And the thing about a counterfeit is that it may look like the one, but there'll be a certain challenge which is a non-negotiable. The Bible tells us something interesting. It says, what shall it profit a man to gain the whole world but yet lose his soul? So is it worth going back to darkness just for one moment of pleasure? And you find that that guy will get what he wants, and maybe that's all he wanted, and he leaves. And then now you're tormented with the fact that you feel unclean, you feel now depressed, and then you're also heartbroken. It's not really worth it. Those that wait upon the Lord renew their strength. They mount up on wings like eagles. They run and they don't grow weary. There's a place for that. I'm proud to share that I have been on a path of sexual purity for more than 4 years now.
Wow.
Yeah, and I live on my own. It's not by my might or by my power, but by the grace of God. And so even for me, when I'm in a relationship, there's certain things I won't do. For example, I'll tell it. And I know maybe the guys are listening as well.
Yes.
I don't believe in kissing when you're in a relationship. I don't believe in cuddling when you're in a relationship. I don't believe in even on like late night dates or sitting on each other's laps. Why? Because the Bible is very clear about how our bodies are his temple. And so it's important that we really, really have to be cognizant of the fact that yes, our bodies are his temple, but also human beings. And so when you allow the human body in a certain environment, it will misbehave. And so a lot of the people who you've heard of who were on a godly path but fell, that normally happens because they trusted their flesh. And so you can't say, okay, no, we're just going to be watching a movie together on the laptop, nothing will happen. You cry. Something will happen. And then before you know it, you're saying, oh God, please forgive us, even holding hands. And then it happens again. Because you shouldn't ever trust your human body. Don't trust the flesh. And so the Bible is clear when it comes to issues of temptation. Flee. Don't ever put yourself in an environment that will make you compromise. And then also, if the guy is serious and he really loves you as much as he says he does, he's willing to wait. And if he's willing to wait, it also means that he's serious about the aspect of marriage. So as soon as he's ready, he'll marry you. Because most people who are in sexual relationships don't even get married to each other. And then also the thing about sex is it may feel good when you are not married. The reason why is that it's motivated by the spirit of lust. And so lust always seeks to do something that is illegal. It always seeks to grieve God. And so you find that for most people who were in sexual relationships before they got married, the moment they get married, all of a sudden, the sex is no longer as good. Why? It's simply because they found themselves in a situation where that which they were doing is no longer illegal. So it's no longer as good. And so the wait is worth it. And I'd encourage anyone in that position to keep waiting on God. He's got your person lined up for you.
That was amazing. I've actually learned a lot because I was going through that. So I just wanted to verify if it's safe and secure.
All right. So where do you see yourself in the next 5 years to come?
I see myself still serving. I'm not sure. I don't know if I'll still be councillor for Chainda, but I'll still be serving the people of Chainda in a more impactful way. I'm really looking forward to that. I think when it comes to politics and leadership, it's not really about what position you're in, but what matters is you doing what God has called you to do. And that means doing it at a greater level of impact. And so I think for me in the next 5 years, I look at serving Chainda, hopefully in a different capacity, but of course with the same vision to make it what it was meant to be.
All right, thank you very much. We have had a great discussion, an educative one, if I must say. And I believe that youths out there have been educated in both sectors of their education and personal life. And at this point, I just want to say thank you once more for joining us on our show, and hoping to have you more on the show. Yeah, thank you very much.
So we've come to an end of the show.
So we've come to an end of this show.